Yeah, it's on the other side of the computer.
Well, I'm back on again. Let me text Mario or Gabriel and text people and see if there's sound now.
Are you live?
Yes.
I don't see it.
I am live. We're 26 seconds in. I've just texted to see if somebody can tell me if we have sound on this show. And once I find out if we have sound, we'll go from there. Start the show again. That was actually a pretty good show, I thought.
We got to give it a minute for it to.
Yeah. I'll give it some. I got to give it time for everybody to be able to get. Because right now I don't have any viewers on, so they have to be able to come back on.
Okay, I found it. Show 1, school segregation.
Yes. So you must be the only viewer. Apparently nobody else come back on. You got sound now?
Yep.
All right. Now, let's get back to our program. Welcome to the Schwee View. This is our first program. It will be on resegregation of schools. The first thing I want to say is thank you for joining me. I'm a little dressed up because it is my first show. I'm pretty happy and pretty proud. I'm looking forward to this. I'm looking forward to the whole program. I'm looking forward to the listeners asking questions and me learning from you as much as hopefully you can learn from us. Do we have Twitter yet?
No.
We still don't have Twitter tonight, so.
Comment on there and I'll be able to read them.
All right. So we're going to be doing this program and hopefully all goes well. Tonight's program is on resegregation of our public schools. We're talking specifically with our Jefferson County, Louisville, Kentucky schools. And as I have learned over this past little bit, that our schools are slightly different than a lot of the schools around the country. We have a very, very advanced school system when it comes to integration and segregation. Our system started in the early 1970s, just after the 1968 civil rights. There were some civil rights laws, which were greatly needed, and unfortunately greatly needed. They shouldn't have had to have. We should have willfully been an integrated society. But I will put in at this time, I am an individual who is from a generation that, again, I don't know if I am proud to say this, happy to say this, or neither, because pride would say you're good that the situation occurred and it has some overtones. But I will say, my generation, I grew up in the first generation to ever be in this society in the United States of America in which we had no legalized segregation. Does not mean there was not still segregation and discrimination. There was. However, it's gotten much better. Still, we have long ways to go. But here in Jefferson County, we have what's called the School of Choice program. And that came about over years of working with trying to integrate our schools. In the early 1970s, some parents from the west end of our community, which is considered it's where the predominantly black population is, they sued because of they needed and wanted integrated schools. It's an acceptable request. So we created, unfortunately, a horrendously terrible busing system in order to bus children all over the county to work out what the federal courts decided was acceptable for us to do. Um, and where we could have no school that was all black, no school that was all white. It had to work off percentages, similar to a jobs quota system. But it was working, but it created a horrendous bus schedule, and where some of the children went to school, they might be on the bus maybe an hour or even 2 hours from the time they got on the bus in the morning to go to school until the time they got off, and then after they got off school, 2 hours to get back home. It was terrible. Parents hated that. We hated it as parents. However, as parents, we also understood that it was for the better good, and so therefore, we learned to accept it. And in the early 1990s, the federal courts deemed our school systems successfully integrated and released us from the bonds of having to be the bonds of having to be forced integration. So now it was done by choice. But the school system liked the fact that we were a very successfully integrated school system, so they did not go away from it. But they brought in what was called the schools of choice, in which parents were able to go to the school and say, this is the school I want my child to go with. And they would list 3 schools, and then the school administrative individuals would put all these applications into a mix and decide which school these children would go to based on what the previous population numbers already were. Now, if your child was in John Smith Elementary School this year, your child was going to stay in John Smith Elementary School next year. They were not going to move children out of their already successfully their already existing school just to get a racial mix right. They simply, new incoming children that moved into an area or wanted to change schools, they were the ones that would change schools and get into a school, again, based on the racial makeup. It was very much a quota system, but it was a quota system that was put in place in order to make sure we did not have segregated schools. Now, over the years, it's gotten bad with busing, but we've learned we like the integrated schools as a whole. There's always somebody who doesn't like something, always something that's not right. My tie is crooked. Okay, it's almost better. So what we've learned to do and is accept it. Some of the parents just decided they would drive their children to school so they're not on the long bus route. But unfortunately, we've had some politicians here in Kentucky that have decided that we're going to fix everything and all the children are going to go to their neighborhood schools. Well, that sounds fine on paper. That really makes, hey, it's a no bus ride. They get to just hop, skip, and a jump right to school. They'll have neighborhood pride. They'll have school pride. Everything will be good. But surfaces don't always work out what's best. The underlying situation is we're going to create segregated schools. Children in the black neighborhoods will go to their local school and it'll be a black school. Children in the white neighborhoods will go to the local school and it'll be a white school. Now what are we going to do? Are we going to make sure all the teachers in the schools that are predominantly black are black and the administrative the same way? And the same thing in the predominantly white schools? Are we going to do this? Are we doing what's best for our country? If we remember history, if we've learned our history, there was a time we had this little skirmish a couple of years ago. It's called the Civil War. We've had a whole lot of issues over this. Well, after the Civil War was over, we had what was called a Reconstruction period. And a lot of people want to debate that the Civil War was not about slavery. Well, that's all fine on how you want to debate that. But if it wasn't about slavery and the horrendous things that were being done to the black population of America at that time, why would we have this period afterward that is completely referred to as the Reconstruction period, in which blacks were given equality? They were able to vote. They were able to do jobs. They were able to own businesses. They were able to own property. And it was becoming quite successful. It was very nice until somebody come along named Jim Crow that created some anger and hostility. And like most societies, people love to jump on the hate bandwagon before they jump on the love bandwagon. It's easier to hate, it's easier to destroy than it is to love or build. It takes you months to build a house, it takes you a couple days to destroy it. It takes you months to build a good relationship with friends, family, your loved ones. It can take only one slip of a word and you've destroyed everything. So everybody's quick to jump on the hate. So Jim Crow comes along and started drumming up a whole lot of ugliness. Society jumped on that. And so our Reconstruction period and the successes that were coming from the Reconstruction period turned into a period of hate, turned into the Jim Crow laws period. And as it turned out, that period went on for decades. And it took a long time for the love of the many to trump the hate of the few. And the horrendous behavior and activity of the people during, especially the white community, specifically the white community, the horrendous behavior that came from the white community during the Jim Crow years, I personally believe is unexcusable. But it happened. Now, you can't compare the atrocities that happened to the black community during the Jim Crow versus what happened to them during slavery. It's completely two different times, but in both cases, it's wrong. But I talk about this because in the 1960s, we had our civil rights riots. We had our civil rights conflicts that came to a boil in the 60s. In 68, we had our civil rights legislation passed. Should have never had to be passed, but it was. And now, 40 some plus years later after that, well, we're at 50, we are now talking about resegregating our schools. We're talking about saying it's okay to go back to segregated schools. Now, if you live in a small community, you don't get to choose what school you go to because there's only one. We have counties in Kentucky in which there's only one elementary, one junior high, one high school. So it doesn't matter. There's not going to be a problem with integrated or segregated. That's the school you go to. But Jefferson County, Louisville, Kentucky, has a bigger population. We have a lot of schools. New York has bigger population, a lot of schools, but they don't worry about integration. They've got their own system. Whether it works or not, I don't know. I haven't lived there. However, by judging by the crime statistics, maybe they ought to do some looking. But here in Jefferson County, 50 years after civil rights legislation was passed and roughly 45 years after we went into integrated school systems, we're now willfully wanting to change back time and go back to segregation. I don't think this is a good idea. We've had success. Now, the statistics, they say, for wanting to go to neighborhood schools is that only 30% of African Americans in our school systems are on the proper grade level reading, and only 60% of the white students are at proper grade level reading. But what they don't tell us is in their research, of those 30%, are those 30% students, or should I say in the African Americans, are the 70 that are not, which is a huge number, the 70% that are not at proper grade level, are they students that are being shipped in, bussed in, or are they students that are still in their actual, would be considered their neighborhood school? What about the 30%? What percentage of those are bussed in versus close to home? And the same in the white community. Break down that the percentage of success and the percentage of failure, and tell us, where were those numbers? Because if you want to just take percentages and throw them on the wall, you can make anything look ugly. Now, let's go with ugly. Of those percentages, say those are, shows that all students that are bussed in are in the failure rate. Does that mean our integration system is failing? No. That means we need to find out why our students are failing. We have a program that we have coming up that will be talking about education. We'll be getting a lot more detailed in education as to who's responsible for education and where does education begin. But tonight's not that program. Tonight's about, should we be segregating our schools? Jefferson County has a very good rapport between all races. Are there some times in which we have problems between white and black? Yes. But we also have problems between white and white. We also have problems between black and black. So our racial breakdown and our racial animosity isn't because of our schools, because we're integrated. I have had conversations with several parents about this. I've had conversations with several teachers. If we get lucky enough, I do have one parent that is going to be a guest on the show tonight, but I have been contacted. They're having a little bit of difficulty getting their children to go to sleep tonight. School is done. So they're having a problem getting their children to go to sleep so they can decide whether or not they'll be able to make it to the show. But we're going to try. Now, back what we were talking about, the teachers are not liking this proposal for neighborhood schools because they do not believe all black schools and all white schools are the right answer. The teachers and other parents, the teachers are the best test of what's going on in a school. I don't think we should be worrying about whether our kids are going to a neighborhood school or not. We should be, as a solution for how to improve our schools. I personally have been arguing for this one for quite a while, that I believe we should have cameras, monitors in our school classrooms. This is a good thing all the way around. The cameras are a one-time startup cost. They can be monitored by parents as well as by school administrators. We have them in some of our daycares. And if you go on and you get an app and you put it on your phone and you want to see what's going on inside your daycare, boom, you do it and you can see what the daycare worker's doing and what your children are doing. We can do this exact same thing in our school systems. A one-time cost. And I do believe school systems could probably get this at a pretty good cost. But then parents could check in. We could see how the teacher's doing. Is the teacher really properly handling the classroom? But we could also see if little Johnny is properly being a student. These cameras could be easily set, digitally record. So if we have a problem with little Johnny and we bring mom in to talk about Johnny and mom and dad say, hey, our Johnny's not the problem. He said he didn't do anything. Roll the tape. And then we can deal with that. That will help us improve our educational levels. Not shipping school, not changing the schools that the students go to, not saying that, hey, you live in this neighborhood, so you have to go to this school. It sounds good on the surface, but it's not. When you live in a city this size and you live in an area, all this is doing is turning back the hands of time. It's taking us back to a time when things were real ugly. People talk that we have race problems today. We do. But we don't have the race problems that we used to have. Today, you have a conflict because of the way somebody wears their pants. 50 years ago, we had problems to where people couldn't even eat in the same restaurant or even weren't even allowed to eat in a restaurant. So when we talk about how race problems are so ugly today, it's because we have forgotten where we came from. Segregation was not good. It was not good then. It will not be good now. I just will never, ever be convinced that segregation will be an acceptable, successful way to live. Children are born not knowing color. We teach color to our children. Children are born not knowing hate. We teach hate to our children. And the unfortunate thing, I've talked about knowing our history. A lot of people think that slavery was over and that all the blacks in the black community should get over it. But what they don't understand, slavery is over, but we have our schools. And our children go to school. And if you'll notice, take some time, kids will play with anybody. Little children, white or black, boys and girls, they just play. That's all they want to do is have fun. But you take our children and you take them into a school and you sit them down. First grade, they're all good and they're having fun. Second grade, they're all good and having fun. Third grade, they're all good and having fun. Fourth grade, we start teaching American history. It kind of changes things. You take fourth grade white Johnny and fourth grade black Johnny. They're all friends up until that time. And now they read their history books. And white Johnny sees that people that look like him came over and discovered America. And they created all this wonderful stuff. Black Johnny reads that same history and see that people that look like him came over on boats too. But they didn't discover shit. They came over to have to work. And they actually had a title. They were all called a slave. Now, what does this do to the black child's emotional, mental state, their self-esteem? They now look at things different. Everything that has to do with success, picture on our money, always is somebody who was white. It seems like no big deal. It's because the vast majority of people that live in this country are white. So no, it's no big deal to all the white people because you read your history book and get what you get out of it. But you don't get the same thing out of it because there's nothing that horrendously happened to the whites as a whole. So it changes your self-esteem when you see this. And now you start seeing things different. And you hear older people talking about stuff. And there's a lot of negativity comes when you start learning about your history. History that can't be taken away. History that has to be learned how to accept. So if you take a school and you segregate it and make it all black and make this school all white, and they get to this point where they're starting to learn about our American history, When you take like minds and put them all together in a group, those like-minded individuals just get stronger into their thoughts and processes. And this happens on all situations. And a lot of times, those like-minded individuals never learn about something else, and they get it starts turning into hatred. It starts turning into animosity. A lot of times we call these cults. Like-minded individuals and these thoughts go running off over here, and the next thing you know, we have a cult. You take all white schools and they hear what they hear, we end up with KKK-minded individuals. You take all black schools and they see our history, they end up with the Black Power movement concept because they have reasons to want to rebel. They have reasons to want to get back. It's not a healthy thing. But the white community doesn't see it that way because we're successful for the most part. Because we don't have to read any ugly about ours. Is our history wonderful? No. But we were never slaves. Not in the United States of America. Okay? We don't have to read about us and our ancestors in a history book that says we were slaves. Now, did all blacks come over on the slave boats? No. Okay, for those individuals who want to put that out there, no. Is anybody who's living in America today ever been a slave? No. Okay, but that does not change the fact of how a child looks at themselves when they start reading about that. So our solution should not be to segregate. Our solution needs to continue to be to integrate. But we need to find a way to teach us, our entire society, how to accept our history as just that, history, and not as an actual way of life that still lives today. Right? And I'm going to jump into our Civil War monuments right now. Because part of our Civil War monuments are an argument based on our Civil War and our Civil War history. People argue that it's heritage that comes from individuals predominantly in the white community. Then there's the other side that says it's racist. I'm going to put it out here, it's neither. The Civil War was a war. It's a war that needed to be fought. But the problem is that it was not a war that needed to be proud of. Nobody should be proud of our Civil War. You might be proud of the outcome of the Civil War in which we were able. I now have my guest. Okay. She is a parent for one of the children in our local schools. And I'm going to finish on my Civil War, and then I'm going to let her speak on her view of the school system. But the South was a foreign country. The Civil War didn't come about as one country. The Civil War was two separate countries. There was the United States of America, and there was the United Southern Confederate States of America. Two separate countries. The South broke off, created its own constitution, created its own government, had a president elected. They had everything. They created their own army. They had weapons, and they shot United States of American people. It was a war. It was a treasonous act. They separated, and they brought arms against the United States. So this is not a question of racial stuff. This is not a question of heritage. This is a question of homage being given to a foreign country that took up arms against the United States. We had World War II. The Japanese attacked the United States. What would we do if anybody wanted to put up a monument of a Japanese soldier or a Japanese hero. No, during the time of World War, we actually had detention camps for Japanese Americans. Okay? We still talk about that atrocity. But the fact is, we will not put up a monument that recognizes any positive Japanese soldier, Japanese president, not on the US soil. We won't do it. So, why should we have anything that represents anybody from the Confederate States of America being represented? I'm sorry. This is this is not heritage, and it's not racist. It's treasonous. We should not be recognizing the United Southern States, Confederate States of America. They were a foreign country. So that's why I tie this into our school system, because it is part of education. It's part of how we should teach about the Civil War and slavery. Things were wrong then, and to go back to segregation would be wrong now. That's my opinion. I now have a guest. Her name is Tanisha. She has a child that is in our Jefferson County school system, and I would like her to now speak and talk about her view on the neighborhood school systems or the segregated schools.
Well, my view would be that it is unnecessary, and I do believe we would be going backwards instead of forward. I mean, when I was in school, we did have to go to our neighborhood school, but our neighborhood was not predominantly black, so that was pretty much okay for us. We were in walking distance, no 2 hour bus rides, unfortunately, like Kentucky. Um, but
May I ask, was it still integrated or were they segregated?
they were integrated.
So, in what city did you go to school?
Chicago,
Downtown Chicago or
Inglewood,
I don't know where part of Chicago.
South Side.
Right. But it was still integrated.
Yes. Oh, now he wakes up.
She has another one that's going to someday be a school student, and he doesn't want to go to sleep. It's kind of just like our regular school kids.
Sorry for the interruptions, you all.
This is Avante, and he's now getting some airtime. He's supposed to be asleep. So, when you went to Inglewood, that was an integrated school system,
Correct.
and this was in the 80s,
No.
no, 90s.
Yes.
Okay, well that's even better because everybody talks about Chicago being um, all black and all hostile and all ugly. You're from Chicago, and you obviously bring a different story.
Correct.
So the schools in Chicago are actually integrated.
Correct.
So why does Louisville want to go back to segregation?
It's its own kind of backwards.
Well, if viewers haven't noticed, you are African American.
Correct.
Would you feel, and I don't think you would, but from what you've already said, but can you think of anything positive that would come out of segregated schools?
Absolutely not.
Do you feel that black students would feel more pride in themselves and better about themselves if they were in an all-black school?
Absolutely not.
Why?
The world is not predominantly white. It's not predominantly black. So why should I teach my kid to live a certain way when that's not the real world? Yes, there is racism and there is some places that are segregated, but it's not the entire world. You can't put a kid in a box and say this is your play area.
So do you think, and I'm just going to probing questions. If a child was to grow up in a predominantly white and or predominantly black school,
it would only create more hate.
Do you think it would be a problem when they graduated and tried to get a job in the workforce?
Correct.
What in the world was that?
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Okay.
pacifier.
So we have a parent of a child that goes to the school, and she is African American, and she does not believe that this would be a positive thing.
No.
Wish we had our Twitter going. I wish we got a whole lot of wishes.
First show, we'll get better at this. I'm sorry.
We did have the technical difficulties of the sound when we first started. That will not happen tomorrow night's show.
Neither will he.
And the little guy maybe be asleep, but one way or another, this has been fun for me. Was my first show, but I'm a lot more comfortable. I actually enjoyed this. I've had a couple of viewers. We've had quite a few viewers, but they dropped off because we lost sound. And I hopefully we'll have you back tomorrow night. We will be back tomorrow night again at 10 o'clock. And
with a babysitter.
We will have things all troubleshot. We will be good. We are signing off.
And tomorrow's topic will be?
I think tomorrow's topic we will discuss the impact of the Supreme Court's ruling today on the Missouri case in which the baker did not have to make a cake for a gay wedding. And what do we think will be the impact on civil rights for this? I personally think it's going to have a difference. It really makes a difference. So tomorrow night, 10 o'clock, we will have the Schwee View up and running again with the topic, what do we think about the Supreme Court's ruling on the bakery not having to make a cake for a same-sex wedding?
All right.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for watching.